I will kick us off. Hello, everyone. I'm Whitney Enright. It's great to see a number of folks from the Chicago Booth Network in New York here on this call. We're very excited today for one of our fellow alumni to lead us through a very exciting conversation in the first of our entrepreneurship series. This event will feature a fireside chat with founders who have taken their startup from idea to company. And I will introduce you to our alum leading us through this conversation, Tamir, here in a moment. But first, a quick call out on a couple events we have coming up in the Chicago Booth, New York alumni area. The first is Global Booth Day, which is in real life. We're very excited to announce on September 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern, and that is in Midtown. We also have an in real life event coming up on September 28th at 6 p.m. in Midtown, which will be a New York City volunteer planning meeting. So we invite everyone to come to those if they are free. Moving on to the event this evening, we are very excited for Tamir to lead us through a thoughtful and insightful panel led to talk to two panelists today. We have Danish and Dr. Richard Park, who Tamir will introduce us to. Before I pass it over to Tamir, let me call out that Dr. Aldad founded Mindful Care, Chicago Booth MBA 2017 in 2018, and he placed first in the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation's Global New Venture Challenge, and second in the Edward Kaplan New Venture Challenge. Mindful Care, the company that Dr. Aldad founded, has raised about $5 million and has locations in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Michigan, Florida, and Connecticut. We're excited tonight to leverage founder expertise in the process of bringing your idea to proof of concept in this first of 3 events in the New York Booth Alumni's Entrepreneurship Series. So keep an eye out for more to come there. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Tamir.
Great. Great. Thank you, Whitney. I appreciate the introduction, and really it's a pleasure to see everyone join us this evening. We're going to have this entrepreneurship series, which will be a course of 3 events like Whitney described, where the first one is this idea to proof of concept, and then we'll do some workshops, and we'll wrap it up with a 360 discussion of various views regarding fundraising. So a lot of great stuff ahead. And the focus of this year for the entrepreneurship series has been healthcare. So a little bit about myself, like Whitney said, I'm the CEO of Mindful Care, and went through the program with a commitment to entrepreneurship and wanted to bring the view of some panelists to share with us what it really means to go from an idea to a proof of concept. And I'm joined today by 2 good friends and leaders in their field. Dr. Richard Park, the founder of CityMD, the leading urgent care in New York that you probably see on the corner of every block now, and Danish Munir, who is the founder of GenoaTelepsych, a leader in telehealth, and founding partner of Gray Matter Capital. So 2 experts in their field that I'm excited to chat with today and explore what their journey was like compared to my journey, and hopefully provide you with some insight of what it was like to go from an idea to an actual proof of concept and ultimately a running or organization, venture, and company. The focus today will be on what it means to identify the problem, creating a solution to that problem you've identified, assessing demand and product market fit, which is a point that a lot of times people try to skip over, and it could lead to premature failure of the organization, and then taking that leap of faith and establishing that proof of concept, right? When are you ready to do that? It's fun to think about your idea, but sometimes you have to buckle up and execute. And when is the right time to pull the trigger will be something we'll explore. So I'll allow our 2 panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we will dive into our conversation. We'll do about a 45-minute chat and then open it to questions. This is super casual. Feel free to write in the chat. I'll look at your questions and try to address them. Go ahead, Richard.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. I do not have an MBA. I was a practicing ER physician for about 10 years. And so it's Richard Park. I'm an ER doctor by training and practice. I was the founder and co-founder and former CEO of CityMD, an urgent care chain that is based in the New York metro area. It is now merged into what we call Summit Health, and about 300 locations with about 3,000 physicians, not just urgent care, but multi-specialty. After founding and leading CityMD for about 10 years, 2019, I co-founded Ascend Partners, which is a private equity firm. We invest in mid-market firms. Very pleased to be here. I'll hand it over next to Danish.
Thank you, Dr. Park, and Tamir, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's good to meet all of you. And like Dr. Park as well, I too don't have an MBA. We have a lot of things in common. He's just much more successful than I am, and much smarter than I am. But we're both Asian Americans, and we both don't have MBAs, and we stumbled into healthcare. But I did study business in my undergrad. I did go to Penn and Wharton, so I do have a bit of a business exposure there. Today, I work as a founding partner of Gray Matter Capital, a venture fund that is dedicated to serving and advancing mental health. We fund innovation in mental health at the earliest stages of companies and supporting founders. But how I became an operator was through my first company called GenoaTelepsych, which was a mental health company, one of the first ones using telemedicine, starting in 2011, in prehistoric times before telemedicine was mainstream. And we did that in a really Gen 1 way. We did telemedicine by building telemedicine rooms and kiosks at existing facilities where patients could go, because our clients, who were Medicaid clients, did not have smartphones or devices or data in a consistent way. And the only way we could reach them was to build some level of physical infrastructure where they could show up that was close to them and was accessible, and our providers could see them remotely. We built that company over 9 years. Bootstrapped for a third of that, then venture-backed, then private equity owned, and ultimately sold it to UnitedHealth, where I spent 2 years before transitioning over into venture.
Great, thank you for those introductions. One thing that I think is challenging early on in transitioning from an idea to a proof of concept is when you realize that there's a problem and something is broken, and you want to fix it, but you haven't articulated it well yet, and you can't put your finger on it. So I'm curious, in both of your experiences, I know for Mindful, I always felt that access to mental health was a problem. I didn't know building a large urgent care chain for mental health would be where I would land, but I knew that something is going on there, and I just couldn't articulate it. In your situations, how did you first realize that there was a problem in your space that you wanted to address?
Happy to go first. Listen, I don't have a lot of business training. I'm an entrepreneur. And so if this is a classic study, I think, Tamir, you had more of a very concept. How do you execute on it? You got a lot of structure and discipline around it, from what I can gather, because that's the type of person you are. I'm an ER doc for a reason. A little bit of ADHD mixed in with let's see what happens. And so if anything, my experience has been, how do you take disorganized chaos and thoughts and not test it properly and go out and jump? And so a lot of people have splattered and gone bankrupt doing that. So a few things went very well for us. A lot of things went very fortunately lucky for us through no genius of our own. So we were very fortunate. We could have easily gone out of business in so many different ways. So at least my challenge after jumping and opening our first office in Manhattan, this is in 2010, December 2010. Urgent care has existed for 20 years. It's been around, but we opened urgent care in Manhattan, in New York City. And we did that because in 2008, the market softened and real estate became affordable. And so we opened in Manhattan, and the biggest challenge we had was awareness. People had no idea what to make of urgent care. What was that? What do you mean just walk in? You don't take appointments. They had are you rock, mineral, or vegetable? And so that was our challenge, and maybe similar to you. They're not used to something new. How do you educate people and then succeed? So probably taking too much airtime.
Not at all. There's a lot of airtime to be taken. But Danish, how do you feel in terms of educating the consumer? It's usually pretty difficult. If the consumer has a demand for your product, it makes your life much easier. If the consumer doesn't know they need your product, that's certainly a hurdle. Where would you say telehealth lands in that kind of scenario?
That's a great question. And I think Dr. Park's point really highlights a really interesting, his approach highlights a really interesting data point for the audience to consider, right? And I'm assuming it's a lot of MBAs here, so they're familiar with business concepts. I think when you have to find a founder market fit with the problem you're trying to solve, right? And if you're able to bring an MVP to market earlier because of your personal strengths or capabilities, in which Dr. Park's case, he was a physician, right? So the MVP is, you hang a shingle and you start seeing patients on day one, and you kind of find out very quickly if it's working or not. And that's a fantastic way to get started. It's lean, it's scrappy. If you're building a tech product, it's a little bit different, right? You're going to make a significant investment. You're going to spend 6, 12, 18 months building something before you can validate that and see if people like it or if it's working. And so you have to take a little bit of a different approach, and you have to think about, hey, am I actually an engineer? Can I build this? Or now do I need to go raise money to hire an engineering team to build this? Which changes the dynamic completely, right? So thinking about your problem and thinking about the founder market fit that you have, your co-founders have, is sort of critical at the beginning stages. I would say for telehealth, maybe I'll share our story, and at the expense of eating some more airtime. The way we got started was there's always sort of this first, like, why are you paying attention to a problem? Like, why do you care about it? For me personally, like a lot of people who come to mental health, it was personal. It was mental health issues in the family. They went severely unaddressed because of the stigma and just the lack of awareness. And, people were significantly impacted. Our family was really impacted for a long time before anything good happened. And, at the same time, in parallel, my day job really sort of allowed me to think about this problem more. I happened to be at the time, after spending a brief amount of time on Wall Street, I happened to be at Microsoft. And I was on this team where my job was to use data science and machine learning to solve online safety problems. And so we were tackling phishing, malware, spam, and pornography. And it was that last bit around parental controls that we were working about and thinking about in 09, 10, when the iPhone was only 2 years old. Facebook had just arrived in high schools. Instagram was still private. When we were thinking about how parenting is changing, and how parents are just completely unprepared for parenting, which is what our team's job was, to give parents tools. And as we thought about that more, we were drawing a line between what was happening there and how that was going to impact mental health for youth downstream, and how nobody was thinking about it and how this was going to create a problem. We were right about the direction of that problem. We severely underestimated the magnitude of that problem. So it always starts with something personal, what brings you to a problem, right? Like your own personal experiences, what you're seeing in your real life, in your environment around you, or what strengths you have, and then how you validate and turn to the business. For us, once we had picked that area, once we decided to focus on mental health, we said, okay, now where is the business opportunity in this area? There's a lot of mental health issues in the world and in the country, but where do you start finding a business? And we found that in 2011, it was so early to tackle mental health and to tackle telemedicine, that we had to go where the problem was most severe. We had to find those points of activation energy, right? Where the activation energy was so high that it would overcome the obstacles, it would overcome the hurdles and the friction when you're so early in the life cycle of innovation of a technology. And so we went to Medicaid, where the need was so high, and we went to serious mental illness, where the acuity was so high. Serious mental illness includes, for the audience, things like schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD. It can include, in a broader definition, substance abuse disorders. In some cases, they are separate, but sometimes they overlap. So we went to those places where we knew that, and it took us some time to figure it out, but once we tested it with people, we went to all kinds of psychiatrists, talked to them to validate it. We found that we were getting the most responsiveness where the problem was highest, and that's how we started working towards our product market fit.
Yeah, I think with product market fit, you also, as an entrepreneur, have to be very open to listening and pivoting. Really, one thing I see, even when mentoring other entrepreneurs, if you're very stubborn and deaf to what your customer is telling you or the market is telling you, and you're really committed to your idea, and you don't want the idea to change, there's an expiration date to the entire thing, right? And it's really, really important to listen and be able to pivot, which makes me wonder, given what you're saying and what I just said, I'm curious to ask both of you, how did the idea and the concept change and evolve from what you wanted to be originally to what the proof of concept was to what it is today?
Yeah. So looking back at CityMD, and I ran it for about 10 years. It's still, I left in 2019, still thriving under better, more professional leadership. Now during that time, we've had 4 of us, we borrowed, begged, borrowed, not stole, we begged and borrowed, and we bootstrapped the first iteration of CityMD. But then we had 2 sponsors, professional sponsors, and every three years, and we've had 3 recapitalizations since. But every 3 years, when you have a new owner or a new investor, you have to reinvent yourself. So it's one company, but it had 3 different life cycles, and it went. And at first, when we opened, it was consumer driven. The patient as a consumer was at least what I was thinking, was our only customer. And then that brings you so far. Might attract the first investment. And then you got to pivot, because now you've sold something. You've made promises that you got to deliver on, and now you got to execute. And everyone knows you overpromise. Maybe not everyone, but oftentimes. And then you got to figure out, wow, how do we live up to those promises? We got what we want. Now what do we do? And so you got to find ways to expand and grow the business. And so we went to a payer. We had the payer as a customer. What can we do to get better rates? And the payer becomes your main customer, in addition to the patient. And then becomes a B2B. So you have to constantly iterate. Every 3 to 5 years, you have to find new growth vectors. So it's challenging, and that's the journey. And most physicians, and I probably overstayed a couple of years, most physicians do not make that journey well, and perhaps overstay their welcome.
Yeah, it's the physician trying to run a business is a balance that I deal with every day. I think it's hard to take off your clinical hat some days, probably outside the scope of our audience to identify with this, but like it hits home personally, because it's a real balancing act, right? You're committed to the patients, and you're also committed to the venture, and it's sustainability. But sometimes it's hard to juxtapose looking at the business through the economics, but then also through clinical excellence and evidence-based medicine. Certainly a balancing act. Danish, how about for you? How has the idea evolved and to where it is today, and changed, and how is your ability to pivot?
Yeah, no, it's so funny. There was so much resonance in that answer from Dr. Park. We also had at least 3 phases to business, maybe 4 now. So the first phase was bootstrap for 3 years. 3 founders, a lot of interns, an army of interns, being super scrappy, unable to raise capital because VCs didn't want to touch mental health. They were too afraid of like the risk of, what if a suicide happens? And candidly, we didn't have the model figured out either, right? We were going, we spent 6 months chasing down direct to consumer, and then we spent 6 months chasing down B2B and then enterprise. And it took us a long time till we found a segment in Medicaid, in SMI, specifically building these telemedicine rooms and kiosks. That took a lot of iteration to figure out. In between, we tried and sold successfully for short periods of time other models, but we could tell that the most dangerous thing in this pre-product market phase is that the things you do, if you work hard enough at them, they kind of sort of work, but you have to really ask yourself, like, is this really going to like work and scale up, or are you just getting some like, modest, moderate activity, which is actually pulling you in the wrong direction? And so that was the hardest challenge in that phase as we were changing. The second phase was post fundraise. Once we had found a model, we were ready to scale. We finally had VCs on board. It was 2015. Digital health was starting to become a thing. So VCs were getting a little bit more comfortable with the risk. And there were pioneers like Rock Health who took the bet on us and backed us, as well as others. That phase was about quick, rapid scale, right? Like, now go from like a 4-person team to a 20-person team in a short amount of time, scale engineering, scale products, get some infrastructure, KPIs in place, and the product remained the service remained the same, but how we built it, how we sold it, who we sold it to started scaling up. The third phase was very quickly we got acquired by a private equity company, Advent. And so now we had very different ownership, and private equity thinks very different from VC, right? They care about seeing, a path to profitability much sooner. For better or for worse, right? It's a good capital model, and I think you have to find the right capital model for the right business. For us, it was a good capital model. It's not for every type of business, especially if you have a tech company that's going to lose money for a long amount of time. You want to make sure you have the right capital model. But for us, it worked. We scaled 23x in those next 3 years. What changed meaningfully was every 6 months or every 12 months, we found more points of focus. We dropped more customer types. So if in 2015, we were open to selling to 12 different types of customers, in 2016, that shrunk to 8 and then 4. And then by 2017, 2018, we were selling to only 2 or 3 types of customers because we had found that resonance and we learned that doing less actually meant more. And then finally, we did launch new product lines, but those were different. It was not the same product for different customers. We launched a direct-to-consumer service line in partnership with the University of California, where we provided telemental health to all of their faculty and staff and their families. And then we launched a third product line in 2017, which was a software product line. We took the platform that we had built over the last 5-6 years and white labeled it and started licensing it to payers as an enterprise platform. So we took assets that we had built and started creating new business models around them. And so that was the third phase. And the fourth phase was finally post-Optum acquisition, which was, again, now we're part of a massive enterprise, new owners, new management, 300,000 people company, a few hundred CEOs inside Optum. Decisions get made very differently in a large enterprise. And so we had to navigate the priorities very differently. We had to tell our story very differently. We had to think about, this small business, as successful as it was, we were seeing 250,000 patient visits a year. In the Optum pond was like a drop in the bucket, right? In the ocean, not in the bucket. So how could we take that business and make it impactful for the enterprise? And they had this Optum behavioral health insurance business, and we were trying to see how can we move the cost needle for them and impact their most expensive population. So it was really interesting learning and experience there.
In retrospect, I didn't realize this because I was a physician without an MBA and very naive. But I'm going to exaggerate here, but sponsors have a 3-year cycle, 3 to 5 years, but it's really 3 years. The first year, what's your new plan? Because everybody paid you on your multiple. The multiple at 10 to 15x, that's already your green space. Your existing business doesn't do it. You got to now double. What's your new plan? So the first year is you already have a plan. That's what invested. You got to retool your business, prep the soil first year. The second year, you got to execute. And third year, you got to find a new sponsor. I'm exaggerating. Maybe it's a little bit longer than that, but that's really the 3 steps. And you always have to be ahead of that. I know I'm in private equity now, but Ascend is a 15-year fund for a reason. We believe healthcare services in particular take longer. That 3-year cycle is vicious. And so we hope we're different. I believe we are different. We are led by physicians. I do believe in great care being the ultimate winner, but you can't do it in 3 years. Can't do it. You make one misstep, you're off and you're out. 3 to 5 years might be too short. So these pivots, the voraciousness of these cycles, I underestimate.
For sure. No, it certainly puts pressure on the entrepreneur. I could tell you, we closed the Series B last summer. Now Series A last summer. We're about to close the Series B. Because of the pressure of constantly having to evolve and change and deliver and promise and deliver. So the innovation, if the entrepreneur thinks that the innovation was just in the beginning, they're sorely mistaken. I mean, I constantly have to think of new ideas and new solutions and new strategies and new partnerships. And every time I do, they just move the bar higher. So it's it does keep me employed, but it is a lot of hard work to constantly have to evolve. And both of you share really great insight there of how important it is. And I think it's great to get in that mindset. If you're thinking of bringing an idea to proof of concept, knowing that you can't be rigid in the execution, and realizing how many times it's going to evolve and change. Do you think there's any risks that early on you maybe didn't appreciate, that you would give as advice to somebody that is thinking about bringing an idea to proof of concept, pitfalls that they could be aware of, or things you would do differently?
I would do a lot of things differently. The way and again, this is very healthcare specific, the way doctors work, because we don't have MBAs and because we're trained to care for patients, and we've been caring for patients for 10, 15 years, we're a little naive. And so when we first started, the four of us, I looked at the doctor, hey, you're the best dressed Faz. You're head of marketing. Tushar, you're the nicest guy. You're head of HR. Gary, you're this and that. And so I'll be CEO because, that's literally how we decided our positions. And when we first started CityMD, one of the challenges was awareness of what this product is. And I kid you not, if you were there in 2010, we were literally dressed up as chickens and running around Lexington Avenue in front of the 6th train, handing out flyers and newspapers. That's not how you create a brand, but that's what we knew. And so that's typical of healthcare. What we ended up doing, for whatever reason, very early on, after the first 6 months of opening, one of our best friends was a professional marketer. One of our other good friends was a computer scientist. And my other professional marketing friend, Calvin Wang, was also the president of a larger corporation. And so we got advice from non-physicians who became early, not the original 4 founders, but the original 6, 7. And so a computer scientist friend taught us the importance of data governance, of why data governance leads. We had no concept of why that was. It turned out that was key to us becoming repeatable, predictable, and scalable. Didn't appreciate it because you didn't need it early on. But as the business went from 1 site to 10 sites to 20 sites to now 300, that allowed us to scale. Okay, and purely by dumb luck, one of our close friends was a computer scientist. Calvin was a branding genius. He just knew how to do it, change the logo, the signing, the interiors, everything about it. And he said, Rich, what we need, having been a professional executive, we need a CFO. And I'm like, why do we need a CFO? I don't think so. No, we need one. And so because we had CFO early on, relative to other urgent cares, other doctors, we were the first to have audited financials. First audited financials leads to capital, whether through banks and or investors. It's those small little differences, purely by dumb luck. Okay. Now, we were open-minded, we listened, but really that's what led to being capitalized a little bit sooner than everyone else and able to scale because our data was accurate. It's all about speed. I didn't appreciate the importance of growth, but speed. 6 months is a lifetime in business.
Anish, how does that resonate with you?
I couldn't agree more. Speed is the name of the game. There are always going to be, looking back at an entrepreneurial journey, there are always going to be things that you will think you could have done better, that you will second guess, every decision, when did you raise money? How much did you raise it for? Did you raise enough? Did you sell too early? Did you sell too late? There's just always going to be things that you look back at. So it's very hard to say objectively what I would do differently or what risks could have been mitigated. And there's so many external factors out of our control, right? Like in 2018, we were the largest telepsychiatry company in the country. It was something to be very proud of. We were seeing 250,000 patient visits. It was great. But you know what? The whole journey was like climbing uphill. And then the pandemic happened and someone just turned the paper, right? And it's like now everything is like downhill, right? And so today, 250,000 patient visits is good, but it's not like, the biggest companies are doing, 5 times more, 7 times more. And so if we had waited 2 more years before we sold, Could we have, had a dramatically different outcome? Maybe, I don't know, right? Who knows? Maybe we would not have survived if we, maybe the capital markets would not have supported us. Who knows? So I don't second guess those types of things. What I do sort of think about is the lessons learned for the next venture are, working with the right people and having people you both have immense trust and confidence in, and also you learn and grow from, is just so important, right? And so as a founder, very, very early, you have to get comfortable hiring above you. You have to get comfortable being able to attract and hire talent above you, because if you become the ceiling in your organization, if you become sort of the smartest person in the room, quote unquote, your organization is doomed. You'll never sort of, unlock its potential. It'll always be limited by your personal potential, which no matter how good you are, can only go so far. So that's probably, I think we learned that fairly early, but I think, you can always learn that earlier, is kind of how I would put it.
It's interesting because you both have a very similar answer, and it's exactly what I wish someone would have told me 3.5 years ago when we opened Mindful. Effectively, the starting team were people in my own network. And, my buddy that knew HR became the head of HR. My buddy that knew marketing became the head. And I just kind of looked within my network because it was easy just to text people that I know that know stuff and have them do things. And it took a while to feel comfortable not being the smartest person in the room, being able to bring subject matter experts that can actually teach me and tell me how it should be done, and what is best practice, in their discipline and in their specialty. But it's a little counterintuitive at first. At first, I think you reach out for who you know because you feel comfortable. You don't want to give up control, so you try not to bring anyone that will threaten that. And then eventually you realize like this isn't gonna get to where it has to be, and then you start kind of loosening up and bringing more subject matter experts and forfeit more control, and it just starts creating a more robust, successful organization over time. So certainly good advice, and it resonates with me completely, and hopefully other people could learn from that and not have to experience what the three of us did. So I want to pivot a little bit. We talked some about the problem and the solution and what it was like getting it off the ground in the beginning. But sometimes you get stuck in your own head that like, this is certainly a problem and my solution is going to fix it. And you develop this grandiosity that it's going to be perfect. And you could sometimes lose touch with reality, and maybe the market doesn't want your product, or maybe there's no demand for your product, but you're so certain that it's amazing that you continue to operate in a vacuum. How did you know that there would be a demand for the product you're creating?
I can go first. I think it's a little bit easier for mine than for other businesses and for most companies that people are starting. Mental health, just in the US, unfortunately, is such a large problem that the demand has existed, continues to exist, will exist for a very long time, right? 1 in 5 adults experience depression or anxiety at any given time in the country. 1 in 3 teens in the last 2 years had suicidal ideation. The number of overdose and suicide deaths combined is one of the top 5, if not top 3, leading causes of death in this country. And that number has increased over the last 2 decades. The US has one of the lowest per capita number of psychiatrists in the developed world. And that number has been roughly flat or declining for the last 2 decades. So it was sort of like, it was so obvious that there's demand that it was almost like puzzling why there is so much demand and no one is doing anything about it. It was sort of like the reverse problem. It was like, are we missing something here? Like, is there something, it felt so obvious that the demand should be there that we had to think, we didn't have to think too hard about jumping in. And it was the same thing when I was starting my fund. Is there going to be so many mental health startups have been created in the last 2 years? Is there need for more capital? Are we, starting this too late? And then we realize that, actually, no, we're starting this. It's still very, very early in this journey. 60% of Americans who were diagnosed in 2020 did not get care. 60% of the patients who were diagnosed. This does not include those who just never got a diagnosis, who never sought care. So there's just such a huge demand in the space that it's a bit of an easy question for me. Curious to hear what Dr. Park says.
Yeah, no, I could tell you about a huge failure we had. We were overconfident when we built out, 9 to a dozen urgent cares in Seattle, across the country, the West Coast, time difference and everything else. Overconfidence, and I still don't know why it didn't work. Every market we had, we're relatively sophisticated. We thought we were pretty repeatable, predictable. We knew that if we opened in Long Island versus 5 boroughs versus Manhattan, in Manhattan, we could predict what our ramp would be, our payback, all those metrics that retailers use. And then we did customer segmentation of all of these different, customer segmentation. And when we looked at Seattle, Tacoma, and the offices, there was no way it could not work. Our perfect demographic was there in spades. The locations are great. Hospital, payer, fragment, everything on the mark, yet utter failure. And I still don't know to this day. I should have spent some time and effort, maybe hired Bain or McKinsey. And to me, I guess you don't know. Sometimes you don't know. So always be, daring, risky, but also have a plan B. Okay. Now,
yeah, the truth is there is a leap of faith. You could get all the research in the world. People could tell you the demand is there. People could tell you that they've done a market analysis and the demographics of your ideal customer base is consistent with the market you're penetrating, a bunch of stuff, and then it could still not work. I'm reminded of the case of Starbucks that tried to penetrate China. I think it was 8 times, and they were successful on the 9th. But it's pretty remarkable that the CEO was so persistent so many times to try to penetrate China and failed, but was certain that we will get it right at one point, and they eventually did. And that it's remarkable. It's an empowering story about entrepreneurship and leadership and persistence that everyone told him, China would never be a successful market for Starbucks, and he was certain that it will be. We're just not doing it right. So, there is certainly a leap of faith that you have to take and continue having conviction and pursuing it. One thing that also comes to mind, though, with with assessing demand and assessing the market is also timing. There is a connection there that sometimes people say, it's a great idea, but it's ahead of its time, and doesn't mean that the demand won't be there or the market doesn't need it. The market just might not be ready for it today. Have you experienced anything with timing?
Timing is critical. 2011 was probably too early to start a mental health company using telemedicine. If you're trying to build a venture-backed business to scale, if you're trying to build like a different kind of company, if you're trying to build like a practice or a group practice or something else, that's fine, or a recovery center. But for a venture-backed company, it was too early. And so timing can be, you can either be too early or you can be too late. It's hard to time it perfectly, but it is good to think about timing. It is good to think about innovation curves. Clay Christensen's, done some good work in that space and kind of illustrating how industry cycle work, how disruptors can play a role in industries. Most people who are doing a startup are looking to be a challenger or a disruptor in some shape or form. And so becoming context aware about the dynamics of your industry and the cycle, where in the cycle your industry is at the moment, is really important because it can impact your adoption, it can impact your capital raise, it can impact so many factors, your talent, ability to attract talent. So those are good things to think about. And then, on the exit again, like I said, did we time it perfectly? I don't know. We did well, but could there have been more value on the other side? Maybe.
To me, I don't have a better answer than that. I think the answer is obviously yes.
And you mentioned a little bit about timing with your previous answer, right? That in Seattle, and then maybe that just wasn't the right time. Doesn't mean that in the future it won't make sense if pivoting or modifying or better understanding, learning from the mistakes and failures. Certainly, I think that both are helpful kind of examples to share, give insight. Anything about validation of self-validation? I know for me, thinking about opening our first mindful care location. I mean, now we open one every couple of weeks. And it's not as nerve-wracking, but opening location one took a lot of courage. And then there were days that I thought I'm in over my head and I should give up and I should go back to the hospital and just be a psychiatrist and collect my paycheck. And I have no business doing this. This is, running a company that will grow to be really big should be someone else's job. And when I meet with other entrepreneurs, especially early on, they all share that there's a level of self-doubt that kind of casts over them throughout the process until they really get comfortable with their venture. Is that something that you guys experience? And if so, do you have any advice on how you fight through that as an early entrepreneur trying to get an idea off the ground? I mean, Richard, not to pick on you, but transitioning from working in the ED 3 12-hour shifts a week to now trying to build a business full-time every day, the stress level is different, the intensity is different. It is career-wise. It's just there's a lot of change there. How did you handle that?
Quite honestly, because of everyone has a story, and everyone has a story in their life before whatever they did, and it always prepares you. You are some of your experiences. My parents, merchants, Koreans, immigrants in New York were merchants. We opened stores and we closed stores. That was part of life. And even after high school, I didn't go to college. I opened up a 1-hour photo store in Manhattan. 1-hour photo store. First it was 83rd and 2nd Avenue, and then we sold that and moved it to 77th and Lex. But hanging up shingles, drywall, opening, closing. 1-hour photo became 1-hour medicine. It was really the same thing, and struggling to pay rent. So the struggles, the constant stress of being unable to pay bills, and that's something I was quite accustomed to. So I actually did not feel a difference. And even as an ER, I had bill collectors knocking on my doors. I have to almost go bankrupt. I have 2 handicapped children now. They're 23 and 21. The stress was, so that grit, resilience that Duckworth talks about, many entrepreneurs have that. Just, you're not used to the increased stress, and so you're not brittle. So it didn't feel particularly stressful, to be quite honest. Perhaps it was lack of self-awareness or aware of danger, lack of paranoia. But I do think, again, everyone says very glibly, it's all about the team, and 100% it's all about the team. And as a leader, are you open to listen to people, listen to other experts? I think that's key in finding great people.
For sure. You're only as strong as your team, right? I tell my team that all the time, that I do get most of the credit for Mindful, and I am the face person, and they send me to events to give speeches. But behind the scenes, it's other people's blood, sweat, and tears that makes Mindful what it is today. And it's important to really recognize that you're nobody without your team, right? And then staying humble is key. Danish, how about you? Anything about kind of maintaining your confidence, dealing with self-doubt, seeking validation. You're on the days that you're kind of questioning whether or not you're going to be successful or the idea makes sense.
Yeah. I think we live in a world where we are constantly surrounded by the echoes of what others are doing. It is very, very hard to not look around and compare yourself, especially when you're a young, early founder, you're early in your career, or even your mid-career, and you're sort of still sort of, you're waiting for that first big win in your life, right? You could have done well, you could have had good academic success, you could have had good jobs, but you still haven't had that sort of like big first win yet. It's so easy to look around, to spend the time doom scrolling on Twitter or your LinkedIn feed and just letting that psych you out, right? Are you ready for something? Are you going to do well at it? You've started it, and was it the right decision? It's just so easy to have that imposter syndrome. And I can't pretend that I haven't experienced that. And I know all my founder friends have at some point or the other, and many of the really successful ones still do. For me personally, there were many points in the journey, and everyone has personal adversity. For me, the adversity was I was an immigrant. I was at a visa. Microsoft was sponsoring my visa. So when I had to leave Microsoft to start this company, I had to walk away from a green card. They had just applied for my green card, and I had to walk away from that and go to this 3-month accelerator that we got into. And my co-founders committed to see it through to the end of the accelerator, but we didn't know if at the end of the accelerator we were going to do the startup or not. And so I was kind of jumping off a cliff, right? It was like, if at the end of the summer we decide not to do this, they were both citizens, they were both going to go back to what they were doing before or go to grad school or something else, I was going to go out of the country. So it was definitely, jumping off a cliff. Luckily for me, I didn't have other adversity in life. I had other privilege in life, right? I was young. I didn't have a family. I didn't have anyone to feed. I just had to worry about myself. I don't have to take care of my parents. So I could take those kinds of risks. And that helped me balance sort of the adversity. Like, it's like, okay, I have to leave this country. You know what? I've made it so far in life. I'll make it again. It'll be okay. But then along the way, there were points where for the first 3 years, we were bootstrapped. We were, paying ourselves minimum wage and living off, ramen and noodles, and living in Manhattan for 3 years is not cheap. So there was definitely many points where we thought about, any one of us at any given time had, moments of weakness where we were like, okay, should we just go do something else, right? Or should we go get another job? And luckily, having a team that we just deeply trusted and had each other to go to and, pull us back from that brink of the edge and recommit to it was really helpful. And that's what kept us on the track the entire time. It was the people, it was the relationships, it was thinking about not just, what's going to happen to me or what my outcome is. It was about thinking about, what does my leaving do to this thing that, by the way, these 2 other people that I love and care for, how much they've put in into this thing, and how it impacts them, and what's best for all of us, not just for me.
For sure. No, I think that's it's all about perspective and framing, right? And those are the kind of the things you're talking about, and constantly framing, reframing, having a perspective. One common denominator, and it goes with applies to me as well, is a history of failure, history of adversity, history of challenges. It does build a certain level of grit within the entrepreneur to be resilient and kind of overcome any sort of self-doubt. One thing that I think worked really well for me, and I actually share this with my team as well when they question their initiatives or their work, is going back to the data. The data doesn't lie. And if you did your diligence and you come up with you identified a problem, you researched it, you have a solution, everything points in the direction of it being successful. If someone says something that throws you off your game, going back to the numbers, going back to the data, recalibrating back to what first prompted you to pursue this is also really helpful. And it reminds you that, all right, we're doing this, and we know why we're doing this, it's purpose here and meaning, and it's supported by our analytics, and that certainly helps you kind of refocus. So we talked about the establishing the idea, establishing the solution, assessing demand, product market fit, a little bit about kind of jumping into the deep end and building that proof of concept and doing it. But the last thing I wanted to touch on a little bit is funding, right? It's really easy to give somebody all this advice, but they're effectively sitting on their hands if they can't afford to do any of this. So I wanted to just spend the last couple of minutes before we open it to questions talking about funding, but share with me a little bit how you funded your initial proof of concept and what you would recommend to somebody who feels like all this advice is helpful, but they're at that point where they need that seed funding to make it happen.
I'll go first. So in 2010, me and 4 friends, Dr. Faz Khan, Tushar Kapoor, and Gary Mazer, 4 of us, we put in $200,000 each. And then, strangely enough, we had the good fortune of meeting our landlord, Mr. Al Glick. Our landlord lent us $300,000. It's quite unusual. So, we bootstrapped. That's December of 2010, and December 2013, we had professional, I'm not going to mention the firms, but we had a professional investor putting some capital. And then again, 2017, another larger PE fund, then a third one afterwards. I would say, because I was so naive, it really is important that you choose your investor, not just for the money, but for how you're going to get along with them. Can you have a cup of coffee? I know people say that, but can you have a cup of coffee? And sponsors, number 1, number 2, number 3, they're motivated by returns. I get that. You have to understand that. I was a little naive. But when you get a professional sponsor, you take that first check. When you take that first check, there is a second bill coming. And I guess sometimes, I was certainly, having been new to this, naive. So you have to be very careful of who you partner with. And upfront, be very clear of timeline expectations and what you plan to do. And even then it's tricky, because people will tell you things that you want to hear, and you will only hear what you want to hear, to be quite honest. Right? And so I would advise you talk to a lot of people. Don't marry the first person you meet, your first date. Speak to a lot of people, talk to the person, spend time with the person. If you can, people can fool you for a day. They can't fool you for 2 days. Go away for 2 days. Spend a lot of time asking a lot of questions. Be very sober and clear. And even then, it's tricky. There's a question, one of the questions one of the attendees are asking. But be very careful. Pick the right partner.
Absolutely. For us, cultural fit is huge. Alignment in that sense, that they identify with the ethos of the company. Like you said, if you can't have a cup of coffee with your lead investor, that's disastrous, right? You want to really establish a strong rapport outside of just discussing the business, and then that leads to a more promising relationship. We are going to turn it to questions in a minute. Danish, anything you want to add about how to get that initial seed funding to get your idea off the ground?
Yeah, sorry about that. My home router just dropped off, so I'm rejoining. But yes, initial idea and seed. It's a very the good news is, especially, I'm going to assume people are interested in healthcare, which is why they're here. But in general, the market for funds has really evolved. 20 years ago, there used to be, 20, 25 firms on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley. And if you wanted to raise some money, you had to kind of fly out there and just spend time there and get to know them. And that was it. And today in North America alone, there are over 10,000 venture capital and private equity firms, not to mention, the many more angel investors and other types of capital that are available out there, right? So the first step to raise a seed capital is just to figure out, what are you trying to raise for? Is it a venture backable business, i.e., can you build a business that can have a really, really fast growth rate? And just to understand that really well, Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, has a really good blog post on what growth for startups means. I would encourage everybody to read that. If you think you want to build a venture capital backed business, then identify who is the right type of fund for you, right? And you have these funds that are these sort of the blue chip Sequoias and Andreessens of the world, right? Like the traditional funds. And these are very large funds. They, invest in a lot of companies, but they also, as a result of their construction, are built that their portfolios are very diversified. And so you have to understand who at the fund you're going to work with, who's the partner who's going to lead your deal, how much access will you have to them, how many companies are they invested in at the time, and how much of their mind share would you be, right? And that's just pragmatic questions to think about. Or do you want to raise money from a smaller fund? Do you want to go to somebody, who's a boutique fund, 20, 50, $100 million, and is going to have a much fewer companies, is going to have a smaller portfolio and can spend more time with you? There are trade-offs. The larger funds, they can do follow-on financing. They might do your seed. And then, by the way, if you do well, they might also do your A and your B, and they can keep going. They have multiple funds. Bad news is if they do your seed and then they don't do your A, guess what? That's a signal to the market. The insiders are not coming back. They know something that we don't. It's going to spook other investors, right? So those are just trade-offs to think about. You might get speed if things work well. You might get negative signaling if things don't. Smaller funds, they can't double down. They might do a pro rata in your next round, but you'll have to go out again and find new investors. So it'll take longer, right? So these are just trade-offs to consider. So this is it's a whole topic in itself, but I would say that, today to find a seed round, it's much easier than it used to be. Even though the specific, last few months is a bit of a tough environment, it's still way easier than it used to be because there's just more capital out there. The best way to raise that capital is to really understand what is the product you're selling. And I don't mean like to your customers, I mean to your investors, right? Funds are there to make a return. They are managing people's money, whether it's people's pension money, whether it's people's personal wealth, they're there to make a return. And everybody has a different way of making that return. Understand how funds work, understand their investment strategy, and see whether the company you're trying to get them to invest in is a fit for that. And then all other factors that Tamir mentioned around, getting to know them and relationship, all of those things apply for sure. But there has to be a fit as well from a purely structural perspective that you should qualify for, which I think a lot of founders are just not aware of, unfortunately. Not a lot of people talk about that. There's not a lot of awareness around that. And I think that's worth getting sharp on.
I think that's very wise, really, from both of you, insight to what to do to raise capital and really get that concept off of the ground. So I appreciate that. That does bring us to the end of the conversation. Unfortunately, I would love to continue, and I do have some more questions I can ask, but I do want to turn to our audience and address some of their questions. But I think you did bring us well from an idea to assessing a problem and a solution and demand and product market fit and then funding. So I appreciate that. Let's turn to some questions from the audience. And you guys can write the questions in the chat box and we'll address them. Actually, I'm not even sure. Am I able to see in my chat the questions from the audience?
There's a question in the Q&A. Are you able to view that?
Oh, I am. Got it. How did ethics come to play with decisions to be sold, such as to private equity? Controversial situations with private equity investing in the ER come in mind. Health feels like a complex area of disruption because of ethics. Does this matter? Or are you mostly interested in making sure to survive through next investments? This is one of the comes to us from an anonymous attendee. Interestingly, I think both of you could share a lot. I could also speak to this. Danish, United being both the provider and the payer, could be an interesting point to address, especially, you look at Optum Ventures, you look at some of these other insurance companies owning actual provider practices rendering care, but also being the payer. What does that really look like? It's certainly a head scratcher at face value. So it'd be interesting to hear both of your perspectives on ethics, and I'll speak to ethics a little bit in psychiatry and mental health and some conflicts we see there too. So really great question. Let's let our panelists take a stab at it.
I have to say, it's a very good, complex question, and I think the jury remains out whether our current environment of PE is beneficial or hurtful. I think the answer always is it depends. No one broad brush. But I share your concerns being an ER physician with many of my colleagues working for used to be independent physician practices, now being bought out and having large. And I can tell you they're not happy and they don't feel like they're in control. And certainly, perhaps, and we're very careful with words here, perhaps patient care is not helped, perhaps. Now, they would make the argument, of course, that they make things more efficient. I'm very torn on this topic. I don't want to speak about our fund as being different, and we're different from everyone else because everyone claims that. But I'm curious to see what other people think, but I think it's jury's out. Part of the problem is the initial valuations are so extremely high. They're so high to begin with. When you start behind, in parentheses, meaning negative, and you're playing catch up, it makes you do unnatural things. So the valuations the expectations are extremely high. And that's not just the investor's fault. It is the entrepreneur's fault. It's greed. And so sometimes the valuations are too high and makes life unbearable. And it makes people do unnatural things.
Unnatural is really interesting because I could tell you, raising Series A and Series B, the expectation to hit revenue targets are extraordinary, even at the expense of like safe clinical care. And what's frustrating is that there are many times that lead investors assign us consultants that are operation experts that can assess throughput and capacity and bottlenecks, and their solutions might make sense if this was like a Quiznos or if this was like a Home Depot cash register line, but telling me that, why are you assessing suicidality in 40 minutes? You should do it in 10. The business would be so much better. It just doesn't work that way. We have people's lives at risk here. I get it that we could be more efficient, but people could die, right? It's a hard balancing act when you're in healthcare, especially medicine, especially high risk medicine, when you're getting pressure from people who strictly assess the business from like P&L statements and not from what actually is happening on the ground. Danish, what are your thoughts?
It's a really interesting subject, a really important subject, and I think Dr. Park's answer is very nuanced. There is no one uniform answer. There is no just pure good or pure bad or pure evil. It's always, unfortunately, it depends. And the reason for that is just like everything else in the world, there are good actors and bad actors. And by the way, besides the actors, there are a set of constraints in the environment. There are a set of incentives at play that are out of people's controls that, by the way, drive a lot of what happens, right? So for example, the reason you might have in your case specifically consultants suggesting specific appointment types versus others is because unfortunately the way the reimbursement landscape is set up is broken, right? The way things are paid for is broken. And that doesn't start in one place, or that blame doesn't belong to one person. That's just a function of like these things evolving in a fragmented way over time, and people stacking bricks and glue and Scotch tape on top of each other, getting to a place where we have now a set of reimbursement codes that, pay for physicians' time in really weird ways, right? Like why is a physician, why is your time more valuable as a physician if you do 4 15-minute appointments than if you did one 60-minute appointment, right? And how does it, like that's difference, that big difference in the math there makes it so that, doing certain kinds of appointments repeatedly can make a clinic go bankrupt, especially in primary care. Not in psychiatry, you can still make money. But if you're doing primary care, by the way, most primary care businesses lose money. And the reason is because the reimbursement codes are not set up to allow the physicians to do the right thing, and physicians choose to do the right thing, and then they go bankrupt. And so, going bankrupt is also not helping anyone, because then the service is not available and the patients don't have any care. And so there's a very complex set of issues here. It's very easy to take broad brushed opinions here. There's obviously a lot of very genuine frustration with healthcare in America because it's so broken and it's so expensive and the outcomes are poor. And it's very easy to want to direct that frustration at whatever party is nearest to you or feels like an easy target to paint or has the most dollars in their hand in the moment, right? It becomes easy to paint them as a target. The challenges are far more complex. They're interdisciplinary. And frankly, most of the time, if you trace it back, if you go down up the tree enough, you end up that it's all back to policy and regulation, right? That's where things are most fundamentally broken. How we pay for healthcare, how we fund healthcare, how we make rules around healthcare is where like the most things are broken. And if we want to direct that frustration somewhere, I would encourage people to start with that.
Absolutely. I mean, to answer the question a little bit more specifically, if this person's asking, how do you assess the private equity firm's commitment to ethical practice? For us, when we assess VCs in our case, if they're appropriate culturally to the way we run our practice, it's by assessing their portfolio companies. And I do talk to some of their portco CEOs as well and ask what their relationship is like and where the pressure is. And by doing both, I usually can get a pulse on if I feel that firm is operating an ethically sound firm with a commitment to clinical excellence. And then that's kind of the portco CEOs give you a little bit of insight. The actual portfolio companies, you're seeing a lot of very revenue focused companies versus companies that also have a social impact, that changes your perspective. So it's good to do diligence and get an idea for who you're dealing with before you kind of get into bed with someone. So that's certainly important. Any other question? Oh, just got another question. This one is also anonymous, and it's, how do you keep functional teams from getting siloed as you grow the company? I mean, I could start. People at Mindful get siloed all the time. I would be lying to you if I told you they don't. When departments are, when we're talking about proof of concepts here, right? And really small ventures. When we started, every department was a one-person show. And they call themselves a department, but it's really one person. And then when they added, person number 2 and person number 3 in their department, they started off very siloed. And then what happened was it felt like a quilt where there's all these departments all doing well individually, but like interdepartmental communication was poor. And that was for us a real chasm we had to cross, because how do you get these people to understand my vision and the global strategy of the company and constantly communicate? And we really worked hard at that. So there's a strange gravitation to be siloed, and you have to resist that and really improve communication. So you improve efficiency that way, and people aren't operating independent of one another, but rather establishing synergies, right? Where 1 + 1 = 3, and that comes from really strong communication. But Richard and Danish, any thoughts on how you prevent departments and people from being siloed as you grow?
Listen, I'd be the first to tell you we were not very good with this. As the organization grows, your experience, you've never been there before, so but this is in retrospect. One common tool that I find useful now in our companies that we work in now, you guys are familiar with RACI, the RACI framework, RACI. So what happened at CityMD earlier was we were so quick to grow open offices. We would open offices and, things never work on time, always delayed. And so we're 3 months delayed. Meanwhile, HR is hired way in advance, 6 months in advance. And nobody knows the left hand, the right hand is doing. And so what RACI, that system, does is it lists every task and it decides who is responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. Right. So if you open a new office, who's a decision maker? It's also a framework for, we agree as an organization, every time we open an office, we need to inform. They don't make a decision. They don't get to say yes or no, but at least you have to inform these people. HR, finance, these people have to be informed. Who's consulted? Who's permissions, co-permissions. So it kind of outlines the codependencies. It's a very functional document. I wish we had used it sooner at CityMD. It doesn't do away with all the cultural mission, vision needs that any good organization needs to have. But in addition to mission and vision, I think RACI is a very practical approach.
That was a really good answer. I wouldn't not add anything to that at all. That's a fantastic framework. I'm going to borrow that.
I'm going to send it to my team after this call. So yeah, that's certainly helpful. Danish, any thoughts there on preventing teams from being siloed, improving interdepartmental communication?
I think there's no silver bullet. Every stage of the company's life cycle requires a different mode of working together and communicating and decision making. And you're, as a CEO, especially a first-time CEO, you're always a student of that art and science. And so, the only sort of guidelines I would have is build really strong feedback mechanisms so that quickly when things are not working, because they will always, you'll fix something and then 6 months later your headcount's doubled and those things will not work that were working beautifully 6 months ago, right? You need a new pattern. And so you have to get good at figuring out when things are not working or when things are about to start breaking down in terms of communication and silos and decision making. And then 2, surround yourself with people who have been in this journey before, who are a few steps ahead of you in this journey, who other founders, investors, advisors, so that you have people to go to talk about these problems and get counsel and figure out how to change your frameworks, bring in new frameworks, keep introducing new ways of doing things.
I think together, it's excellent advice. We'll move on. Any other questions? All right. Well, I do want to thank both Richard Park and Danish Munir for joining me tonight. It was really a pleasure to explore the idea of bringing something from a concept to an actual proof of concept, and what that journey looks like. So I know you're both extremely busy, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with me. As entrepreneurs, it's really exciting to kind of connect and hear how similar our paths are, and we can identify with each other a lot and really had similar answers, which I really did enjoy the conversation. So thank you to the audience. Thank you very much for being with us. This is the first of 3 parts of a series where we will continue exploring entrepreneurship through the lens of healthcare this year. We hope to see you at our future events. Once again, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you all.